Welcome to the Dawg Post pregame show. Dean Legge, your host here today. Got everybody spread around the country. Dawg Post, Matt DeBerry right now is watching a couple five-star prospects in Louisiana, in Las Vegas. Dylan Weber just returning from watching a five-star prospect in Houston, and I am guarding the layer of Dawg Post right now. Let's get you ready for this Murray State-Georgia game, a game that Georgia should roll pretty good in. They are almost 50-point favorites in this one, but the biggest news of the day is Vince Dooley having the field named after him. This is something that's been coming for a long time, seems like a very long time actually, and finally it's happening. Here's what Kirby Smart had to say about his interaction with Vince Dooley when he was younger, and what this day means for the Georgia community.
As a player, he would come in and talk to the team annually. He would come speak to the team in the team meeting room when we played for Coach Goff, and I remember that. I had some interactions with him on student athletic council and things like that, but he's always been tremendous to me. My first real meaningful interactions were probably at LSU when Derek was coaching, and he would come over to games and be around the staff, and been up at the lake where my parents live, and they had a home up there. So Coach Dooley's been unbelievable to my family, my parents, and also to me. So I'm just honored that he could do this and that we could get the field name for him.
Vince Dooley really is a legend. He's 87 years old, and he took over the Georgia program in his early 30s. He was really a very young man at the time. I mean, Kirby was 42 or 41, I think, when he started, maybe 40 at Georgia, but not nearly as young as Vince was in 1960. Six or so, whenever it was. And Georgia had success pretty quickly. I mean, he got them to the Sun Bowl where they got absolutely destroyed by Nebraska, but that was progress, believe it or not. And then soon thereafter, they won the conference for the first time since 1959, which was the team with Fran Tarkenton. So, but as I've talked about all week, Vince's legacy to me is a little different than it is for a lot of people. Having spent time on a board of trustees at higher education, I know how important that finances can be, and Vince was a tremendous steward of finances at Georgia. You never heard of Georgia really having issues on that front. And then more than that, Vince's guidance in getting television away from the hands of the NCAA changed the trajectory of college football, college athletics too, but college football. And the reason why we probably have only seen a playoff lately is because college football has been so fractured for so long. It's come together more and more, obviously, lately, but one thing that has kept the power in the conferences is that they own their own rights. They don't, and they do that in basketball too, but there's no bigger power in college basketball than the NCAA tournament. It determines the champion of the universe, for lack of a better term. In college football, obviously, the conferences have a huge say in who goes to play for championships. Georgia was the first team to play in a Sugar Bowl that was an SEC Sugar Bowl, not just the Sugar Bowl with no tie-ins. That was 1976 team with 1975 team, 1976 Sugar Bowl with Ray Goff and those guys. But Vince's stewardship through the years, after he became athletic director, and then Georgia sued, along with Oklahoma, the NCAA for the right to televise games, or more games, was change the sport. And, a year later, Georgia, Florida, the rest of the SEC had a television package on TBS. Fast forward a few years after that, everyone in college football agreed to, that was kind of some sort of confederacy of college football teams, but it was the CFA, for lack of a better term, and everyone played essentially on ABC. Then Notre Dame left, went to NBC, and soon thereafter, the SEC left to go to CBS, and they've been with them ever since, and I don't know that I'm going to see that changing. I keep rambling about something that doesn't really matter, maybe to the casual fan, but the casual fan wouldn't be watching the Murray State-Georgia game on ESPN2 if it weren't for Vince Dooley. Georgia fans would only be watching Georgia, Florida, and Georgia, Georgia Tech, or Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Carolina, or Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia, Tennessee. So the NCAA was restricting programs from playing on national television. Everybody had to play, and they were only played a certain amount of times. So if you didn't watch the game in person, then you just didn't watch the game. You were listening to Larry Munson or so forth. But when that got destroyed, you slowly saw everything change, and that's all because of Vince Dooley. Now, it wasn't the University of Georgia. It was University of Georgia's athletic department, obviously with the blessing of the university. But it was University of Georgia athletic department with the Board of Regents from the University of Oklahoma. So those two entities sued, and the Supreme Court was in favor with those two, and the sport's never been the same since. That right there is Vince Dooley's biggest legacy that has affected millions and millions of people, has created billions of dollars of income for both the television companies as well as the schools. Georgia just passed today an $80 million football operations center expansion. That doesn't happen without TV money, period. Because TV money right now is about anywhere from $40 to $44 million a year at Georgia. And in about 6 years, it will be about $80 million probably. It will be significantly higher because the Tier 1 rights, which is what CBS pays for right now, only about $56, $57 million a year. Those are up for bid right now, and that change will come in 2023, 24. So this is an important thing to not forget about Vince, is that is the number one thing that he will, that he has affected college football with. That was a huge game-changing move that Georgia and Oklahoma both won in 1984. A huge monumental landmark thing. I don't want to get so far away from football. Georgia with Murray State. Last week, Brian Herrien started for Georgia at running back. Who the starter is doesn't matter as much as it used to. Brian looked good Saturday, and Brian is a worker. He's a grinder. He was not heavily recruited out of high school, but he has played well at Georgia. Maybe this is a season where he really surpasses expectations, which have grown for him over time. Let's listen to what Kirby had to say about Brian Herrien.
When Brian came out, in my mind, he was rated just as high as the guys that are here. So I don't give relevance to those numbers because I knew Brian as an 11th grader. I knew him as a senior. I knew him when he came to camp. I knew him when we went through the recruiting process, and just as talented as those guys. He wasn't from some of the same places, and he didn't have his academics as much in order. But Brian plays with a chip on his shoulder because of that, but I never perceived Brian to be any less than other guys.
Brian Herrien is hard not to like. He runs very physical and hard. He's different than the other backs at Georgia. I guess he's taller, maybe a little bit more slender. But Brian is a guy who will fight, and he's a guy that I think people should admire. He has worked a lot. I didn't think he would be a game-changing guy come out of high school, and I wouldn't argue right now that he is a game-changing guy. But let's be honest, most people that play this sport are not game changers. There's very few DeAndre Swifts out there. But there's something to be said for the guy that constantly fights and works and does what is expected of him and more. If Brian Herrien were just a really good special teams player, it'd be one thing. He is starting at running back at the University of Georgia. He's got some pretty good company in that, pantheon of players, Herschel Walker. So there's a lot to admire with Brian, and he's really done himself a service over time. Let's listen to Kirby talk just a little bit about Georgia's defensive line and how they played in the season, what he's got expected for them for here on out.
Well, they got to control the run game. When they get an opportunity to rush the passer, they've got to be successful. They've got to affect the quarterback, and we've got to give them an opportunity to get one-on-ones by bringing more people than four, so they're not fighting two people as much as we possibly can and be effective. But I'm not disappointed with the effort. They didn't give up a touchdown in college football today. Guys, I don't care who you're playing. It's hard to do, and they played hard, and they played well in the red area, and we got to do a lot of things better.
Well, you do. Kirby's kind of constantly want things to be better, but they played pretty well. The defense, generally speaking, the defensive line for sure, but the defense really did play pretty well for the Dogs, and I don't think there's a lot to complain about if you're Georgia or Kirby Smart. Look, the kickoff is not that far away. If you're not in your seats by about 3:40, you're going to miss the Vince Dooley ceremony. So be there by then. This is Dean Legge wrapping up the Dawg Post pregame show. We'll see you after the game. Look for Legge's thoughts riding home and all the action on Dawg Post, DAWGPOST.com. We'll see you on the website.